Hi everyone, and in today's video we're going to take an in-depth look at the HUmar. Hi everyone, and in today's video for PSO Blueburst we're going to continue the series of beginner's guides to the different classes. And today we're going to focus on the last of the hunters, which is HUmar. So what we'll do is we'll go through what the name means first of all, then we'll go through all the different stat distributions, how the character looks at level 1 and level 200, we'll go through some recommended gear, advantages, disadvantages of the class, some recommended section IDs, and we'll also show a little boss fight at the end. So the first thing we need to cover is the name. So HUmar. PSO, as I mentioned in the previous videos, uses this naming system where the first part of the name denotes what character class archetype you are, and the second part of the name denotes what gender and race you are. So for HUmar, the Hu part of the name means hunter, which means you predominantly use melee weapons. And the Mar part means male human. So HUmar is a male human hunter. So it's quite a simple one to remember overall. Now, HUmar is one of the two human hunters, the other one being Hunuel, which is Newman. So we have advantages, so we have things like techniques, but we don't get access to things like traps and so on. So there are advantages and disadvantages to use in this class. So what we'll do first of all, just before we go into those, is we'll go into the actual class stat breakdown first, so you can see where the strengths and weaknesses there lie. So source data is from the Affinia wiki. So at level 1, our HP... at level 1, our HP starts at 40, which is right in the middle of all the hunters. Behind the two android hunters, but ahead of Hunuel. We have 29 TP, which is by far the least of the hunters. Discounting the androids, obviously, because they don't get TP at all. We have 45 attack power, which is the same as every other hunter class apart from Hunuel, which is a little bit lower. We have 17 defense, which is actually the lowest of all the hunters. 29 mental strength, which again is quite a way behind Hunuel. We have 68 attack accuracy, which is, it's in the middle of the hunters, but it's actually on the upper end. So we're quite a bit ahead of Hunuel. We are a little bit ahead of Hucast, but we're behind Hucasil. And then evade, we have 45 evade, which is again about in the middle. If we then factor in level 200, just again a quick note, we don't count luck in these videos because luck is a stat you only increase by luck materials or by using different gear. It doesn't actually increase by level. Just as a note on that though, with a hunter you do generally want to increase your luck to as high as it can go because it affects your critical hit rate. So if we then go to level 200, and this is level 200 base stats, so without any materials, our HP, as you can see here, goes to 1420, which is again roughly in the middle of all the hunters. We are ahead of Hucasil, and we're quite a bit ahead of Hunuel, but we're far behind Hucast. TP goes to 793, which is way behind Hunuel. Attack power goes to 943, which is a reasonable amount ahead of Hunuel. It's a little bit ahead of Hucasil, but again, way behind Hucast. Defense goes to 422, which is roughly in the middle of all the hunters. Mental strength goes to 594, which is, again, way behind Hunuel. Attack accuracy goes to 174, which is actually pretty good for a hunter. So we are way ahead of Hunuel on this. Hunuel actually only goes to 147. We are significantly ahead of Hucast, but we are a little bit behind Hucasil. Then our evade goes to 682, which is just ahead of Hunuel, but way behind Hucasil. If we then factor maximum stats in, our HP goes to 1670, which is ahead of Hucasil by a little bit, and significantly ahead of Hunuel, but again, way behind Hucast. TP goes to 1181, which is a long way behind Hunuel. Attack power is 1397, which is middle of the road. It's pretty much bang on average for a hunter. Our defense goes to 579, which does close the gap on HUmar a little bit, but we are still just behind them. But we are ahead of HUmar. Our mental strength goes to 732, which is it's around about half, roughly, of what HUmar has. So a big difference. Our attack accuracy goes to 200, which again is pretty good for a hunter overall. HUmar does pull it back a bit with maximum stats. She does come back to 199, but we are still just ahead of her. We're ahead of HUcast, but we are behind HUmar. And then our evade goes to 756, which is ahead of HUcast, but behind the other hunters. So HUmar actually pulls ahead on evade. So what you can see by looking at HUmar's stats is it is quite a balanced class overall. We have fairly average HP, we have fairly average attack power. Our TP and mental strength are quite low, but we are one of only 2 hunters that can use that at all. Our accuracy is pretty good, our defense is pretty average, and our evade is pretty average. So it's quite a balanced class overall. Unfortunately, this has led to a reputation with HUmar of, and the game even labels HUmar as a beginner class. It really, honestly, as someone who's played PSO for over 20 years, HUmar, I would not class it as a beginner class. There are several issues with HUmar that make it actually quite a difficult class to play well. It doesn't mean it's a bad class, but there are several issues with it that make it just a bit more difficult to play. And I'll go into those shortly. So as we are a human hunter, we do get access to some techniques. So if we go into our technique menu, this is a sandbox character, so I haven't learned everything on this character. But just so you got the details of what exactly HUmar can learn, we're quite limited. So if you've watched the video for HUmar, it's quite similar to that. So what we have access to with HUmar is, for our simple attacks, we have up to level 15 for Foi, Zonde, and Barter. We get up to level 15 Gifoi, Gizonde, and Gibata. We get up to level 15 Rafoi, Razonde, Rabata. But we don't get access to Grand Son Megid, those are force only. We get up to level 15 Resta. We get Anti up to level 5. We don't get access to Reverser because that's force only. And then for our support techniques, we don't get access to Shifter. We don't get access to D-Band. But we do get access to a level 15 Jellant and Zalur. And we do get access to Ryuka as well, which is the Telepipe technique. So what I was saying earlier about there being some issues with HUmar is that with HUmar, the only way you can raise your attack power more and your defense more is through gear that gives you that ability. Which I'll go on to later how you can do that. What that means is that the only buffing or debuffing that you can do with the HUmar is that you can use a level 15 Jellant or Zalur on enemies. But you don't really have a huge amount of TP to do that with, so you can't really spam it too much. And it just makes it so that the limited range of your Jellans a bit smaller. It just generally means that you're just not as proficient as support as, say, HUmar. HUmar obviously has less attack power to begin with, but has the ability to buff her attack power up with level 20 Shifter and then use level 20 Zalur on enemies. What this actually means in practice is quite interesting. So what this means in practice is, there is a table on Affinia, which what it shows is each class's solo attack power. And what this factors in is what each class can get their attack power to just on their own. So, for example, a HUmar with level 20 Shifter with maximum base attack power will have 1,666 attack power with level 20 Shifter active. A HUmar, because you don't get access to Shifter normally, the only way you can get it is through an item called S-Red's Blade, which I'll go on to later, which gives you a level 3 Shifter. So that level 3 Shifter will put your attack power up to 1574, which is, although you actually have a higher attack power than HUmar, in solo play, HUmar will actually be stronger generally, just because they've got that level 20 Shifter and the benefit of that level 20 Zalur as well. Yes, you can lower enemy defense with a level 15 Zalur, but that's not as effective as HUmar's level 20. and the difference in attack power that level 20 Shifter makes is quite substantial. So in solo play, a class like HUmar is actually stronger, even though HUmar's stats might look like they'll do more damage. So it's quite a strange issue with HUmar. It does limit the class solo to an extent, so just bear that in mind if you are considering picking HUmar. I would say it is one of the potentially weaker solo classes. If you are looking for a non-android hunter for solo play, I would probably verge towards HUmar instead. Ultimately, play what you want to play, and HUmar will still do fine. It's just that you will probably find it a little bit more difficult. In party play, that goes out the window, because in party play, if you've got a force with you, you're going to get the level 30 Shifter and the level 30 Zalur anywhere, so then you'll be way more powerful than a HUmar then. So it kind of depends on what you want to play, really. If you're going to be playing primarily party play, I say that 5 times fast, you might want to go towards HUmar because you're going to get that extra bonus. But then it depends if you want to play a human character or an android, because if you're going for raw damage, you may as well play HUcast at that point. So it's in this strange place, HUmar. I don't necessarily think it's a bad class, but I do think it has some issues with how it's built. The other small issue with it is because you only get level 5 anti, you can't cure all statuses with it. So if someone gets frozen, you can't cure them from freeze, because that requires level 7 anti, which again HUmar will be able to get rid of. So there is some minor issues with HUmar that I just wanted to get out there, just for anyone who's considering it. Another little note on the techniques as well is another reason they're not as useful on HUmar is because at level 15, the casting times on techniques tend to be a bit longer at lower level. So what you'll find with HUmar is that your attacks will tend to be a little bit slower than HUmar's. So that means that they're generally not as good for locking down enemies. So one common tactic you can use, for example, in episode 4, is to spam Gifoi to stop Zeus from dive bombing you. It's a little bit harder to do that with a HUmar because your Gifoi is a little bit slow to come out. So just bear that in mind. It's not game breaking by any means, but it just something to be aware of if you are going to play HUmar. So next thing we'll do is we'll look at some gear that you might want to recommend if you are going to play HUmar. First thing we'll do is we'll look at mag. So got a mag here. So this ADori. So this is the mag I'd probably recommend overall. So it's pretty much a typical power mag. 5 defense, 147 power, 48 dex, 0 mind. Now this differs slightly from the regular power mag, which is normally 5, 145, 50, 0. The reason you do this is because if you go with this distribution, which is obviously only a few points different, if you go with this, with certain gear, you can max your stats quite easily with HUmar. There is also another variant of this that you can use as well, which it ultimately depends if you've got V101 or not. If you're playing on GameCube or on Classic, you might just want to go with a typical power mag, so 5, 145, 50, 0. You'll do absolutely fine with that. So next, let's talk Photon Blasts. So I'd probably just go with the usual 3 that I recommend, so Estella, Pillar, and Myla and Eula. Estella for focus damage, Pillar for AoE damage, and Myla and Eula should be obvious that it's quite useful on HUmar because you don't have access to Shifter and D-Band normally. So this gives you a level 21 Shifter and D-Band, which, while it's active, will make you stronger than HUmar in solo play. Should also be obvious that it's useful for Photon Blast chains as well. So if no one else has Myla and Eula in a Photon Blast chain, you can use it to get that really big Shifter and D-Band for everyone. So I'd probably just go with those typical 3 that everyone uses. The other Photon Blasts, honestly, are very situational, and some of them are just not worth using at all. So that's mag, really, really simple. Next up, if we look at some, let's look at some weapons next. So first one is a weapon and armor combination. So Disc of Braidman. So if you get one of these with hit, it's pretty easy to get Slicer, and as a Berserk special. If you pair this with the 13 armor from Blue Burst, it gives you a really, really nice set boost. And this is fantastic for dealing really, really high damage to either groups of enemies or to bosses that have parts that are clustered together. One example I can think of that's really useful on is particularly on the first phase of the episode 4 boss. A lot of its targets, when its tail stuck out the ground, are really, really close together, and using a Berserk Slicer on those just shreds them. So this is a fantastic weapon, really, really underrated. A lot of people discount it just because of how common it is. If you can, though, you do want to be trying to get on with hit. So just for the purposes of this, again, this is a sandbox character, so I've created these items, but this is a 50 hit one. I would say just try and get one that's got some hit percentage on it, and it should do you really, really well. So next up, the S-Red's Blade, which I mentioned earlier. So this, you don't really use it for actual damage. The main reason that you use this, I touched on it a little bit earlier, is that it has quite a unique special attack. So when you use it, it does a random level 3 shifter or deband. Now, it's not a fantastic attack power boost by any means, but this is the only way that I'm aware of that HUmar can get shifter and deband in solo without using Myla and Eula. Now again, it's not going to last very long. It's not going to give you a huge attack power boost, but it's something. If you want to use these as a weapon, you can. The animation's not brilliant on male humans, but it's usable. And they are pretty strong daggers overall, so if you do want to use them as weapons, you can. It's just that they're not going to be meta for damage or anything like that. You basically use them for the special attack. So next up, we've got other single target options. So we've got things like Jizai. Jizai is a twin sword that you make from combining Guren and Shoren. It's a fantastic twin sword. It has really, really high attack power. It's quite accurate. And it has an unreduced health special. So it's really, really good for instant killing certain enemies, particularly in episode 2. It's also really good for killing the lizards in episode 4 as well. But it's just a very strong weapon overall. If you're playing on Classic, you could sub this out for another twin sword. So you could use something like Asuka, or you could use Sanga and Yasha. Alternatively, if you don't want to use a twin sword, you can also go with weapons like the Black King Bar, which is a really, really strong double saber. This, if you don't know how to get this, you get a Monkey King Bar, take it to the Gallon shop quest, have some photon drops in your inventory, and you want to trade photon drops for an item called a Blue Black Stone, and then use the Blue Black Stone on a fully ground Monkey King Bar, and it'll turn into a Black King Bar. This is pretty much the strongest double saber in the game, and it has, I believe it's a Devil's Special, which cuts enemy HP. So it's pretty useful for that, but it's mainly just for damage on one target. So, and this is available on episode 1 and 2 as well, so this isn't a blue burst item. So I definitely recommend that as well. There is other double sabers you could use as well. So you could go with something like an S-rank twin if you wanted to, and then you could customize the special on it. You could go with a twin blaze. So a twin blaze actually casts Gifoy as a special attack, so that's one way of getting a Gifoy stagger without actually casting it. So that's quite a useful weapon for that. There's other weapons as well, like Demolition Comet, things like that. But Black King Bar is probably the strongest of them all. Next up, the perennial favourite in these videos, Excalibur. This is obtained by getting a so-called Lame d'Argent in Blue Burst, and then equipping it and killing 10,000 enemies. And once you kill 10,000, you'll be able to unseal it into Excalibur. Excalibur is a fantastic weapon. It's probably the strongest weapon in the game. It's a saber with very, very high attack. It hits 3 targets, and it has a Berserk special. It's unbelievably broken, and on a hunter, it's absolutely devastating on small groups of enemies. There are situations where other weapons are going to be better, so if you are just fighting one individual target, sometimes it's better to use like a multi-hit weapon like a double saber, because the number of hits overall will add up to about the same as Excal anywhere. Particularly if you've got an enemy with a couple of targets that are grouped close together, like, you know, certain bosses, or if you've got a small group of enemies, Excalibur is absolutely brutal. It's a fantastic weapon. The only downside is, my opinion is, I think it looks terrible and it sounds weird, but that's subjective. So yeah, that's definite recommendation as well. Next, we've got a few other options for sacrificial specials. So an easy one to get is the Vijaya or Vijaya. I have no idea how you pronounce this weapon. It's really, really easy to get. With this, again, you want to try and get on with hit if you can. The reason for this is, I'm going to call it Vijaya from now on. It has a special version of charge for its special. So instead of using 200 Mazetta, it uses 10,000. But it's about 5.5 times damage multiplier. So it actually does a ridiculous amount of damage. It's actually one of, if not the strongest partisans in the game. Just that. The big downside with this, obviously, is that it's going to chew through your money really, really quickly. So use it with caution or with very deep pockets. The advantage of this is that you can get one really early. Another option, if you don't want to go that route, is you could go with something like Yunchang. So Yunchang is, again, very, very strong partisan. And this has a Berserk special. So this will sacrifice your HP to do tons of damage. And as it's a partisan, it can hit up to 10 targets. I believe it's up to 10 anyway. Fantastic weapon. This is blue burst only though. If you're playing on Classic and you want a Berserk alternative and you can't get Yunchang, or maybe you just prefer swords, there is another option, which is Zanba. So Zanba is quite a unique weapon in that it's only usable by males. Now this, fantastic weapon, particularly if you get on with hit, it's going to be brutal. As it's a sword, it'll hit up to 10 targets and it has reasonable attack power and a Berserk special. Again, the only limiting factor is it is only usable by HUmar and HUcast for some reason. There are a few weapons in PSO like that where they're only usable by certain genders, which I've always thought is a bit weird, but okay. So this is another option you can go with if you either don't want to use Yunchang, or you can't find Yunchang, or if you're playing a version where you can't get it. So definitely recommended to use Zanba as well. You can also go with, if you don't want to use Berserk and you want to use Spirit instead, you could also go with the 3084 model Flower and Sword. So the 3084 Flower and Sword is another sword you can get in episode 1 and 2. Downside is it only drops on yellow bows from one specific drop. It's a very easy drop to get. It just drops from Oblilies in Temple. Quite an easy drop rate. If you're going for that, I'd recommend to try and just farm one with hit. The advantage of that sword is that it grinds really, really high. Grinds to about 85. And as a spirit special. So that sacrifices TP instead of HP. So if you're more concerned about just busting through your TP instead, you could go with the 384 Flowers instead. Typically, with the HUmar, I'd probably err more towards Zanba or Yunchang. But it depends on your playstyle, really. Some people just don't like using Berserk because they feel it's quite a risky playstyle. And it is. So if you don't want that risk, you can go with something like the 384 Flowers instead. Or something like VIA. So entirely up to you. So those are probably the main weapons I would recommend. As for defensive gear, so if we start with armors, so we've already covered 13 just purely for its set boost. You could always go with something like Blue ADori Violet Nimado. This is an armor that gives you a 40% battle speed increase built in. So the same as a Heavenly Battle. Also gives you a little bit of resistance, as not much, and has reasonable defense and evade. The other advantage of this is it actually has set boost with certain weapons. So it has a set boost with certain, I believe it's with Sanga and Yasha. I don't know if there's any other weapons offhand. I'd have to look that up. But certain katanas and twin swords it has set boost with. So that's a really nice armor. It also frees up a slot so you don't have to use one for battle speed increase. But I'll come back to that. If you're playing on Classic, you could use something like a Luminous Field. Luminous Field is a really, really useful armor. Really nice defensive stats. Its resistances are not brilliant. It gives you really decent dark and light resist, but nothing for fire, ice, or lightning. But it's got decent stats. It does drain your HP slowly over time, but it's a very, very slow drain rate, so it's nothing to worry about at all. You could also go with there's various other armors you could use in Classic, so you could go with something like a Brightness Circle. They give like has really nice resistances to certain elements, and again has very nice stats. You could use something like a DF Field or Virus Armor Lafeteria. There's quite a few different options you could go with on Classic if you wanted to. For Blue Burst, it is a little bit harder to pick. I'd probably go with the Blue ADori. Later on, you could switch it out even to something like Crimson Court if you wanted to. Crimson Court has a nice set boost with some of the red weapons. So there is a few different options you could use for armor. It's not as locked in place for HUmar. The reason I mentioned about the Blue ADori about it, the battle speed increase not being too much of an issue, is because quite often at endgame you are going to use a V101 as one of your units. So the V101, I cover this in pretty much all my videos. It's a unit that increases your attack power, your evade, your defense, your mental strength, and your luck by 15. Increases your accuracy by a very small amount, and it also boosts your attack speed by 40%. Doesn't tell you that in the description, but it's 40%. So basically, this is a fantastic unit to use, mainly because it gives 15 to pretty much all your stats. 15 luck is really nice. The accuracy increase is pretty much negligible. It doesn't really make any difference. And the attack speed boost is just a really nice bonus. Because of that, all of that wrapped into one unit means that it's pretty much a staple unit in Blue Burst. And because of that, it means that the Blue Adoshi's battle speed increase isn't really necessary, because the V101 gives you it anywhere. So it does give you a bit more freedom to move away from Blue Adoshi if you want to. But if you don't have a V101, or definitely if you don't have a Heavenly Battle, you can use the Blue Adoshi to sort of fill that gap. And Blue Adoshi, even with V101, is still a really, really good armor, just for that set boost, and just the stats on it are quite good anywhere. So don't feel you have to not use Blue Adoshi later. It is still a really, really good armor. It's just that once you've got V101, it will kind of take away one of the main benefits of Blue Adoshi. Another unit you can use is Proof of a Sword Saint. So Proof of a Sword Saint, you get this by finding Swordsman's Law, and then killing 20,000 enemies while it's equipped in your armor, and it'll unseal into Proof of Sword Saint. This, as you can see, raises your accuracy by 30, which is huge. Your evade by 60, but it does lower your defense by 20 when you're equipped with. It says when you're equipped with a saber, katana, or twin sword. In reality, that's not exactly true. It's only certain sabers, katanas, and twin swords. So what I would do is, if you look on the Affinia wiki, it will list all of the ones that are actually affected by this, because there are certain sabers, katanas, and twin swords that are not affected by this boost. But that is a very good unit. Just honestly, the 30 accuracy on its own is really, really nice. Next up, we've got options like Smart Link. So Smart Link is again a Blue Burst unit, and this, it says it raises ATA for hunters and rangers using ranged attacks. That's not true. It's quite a misleading description. What it actually does is, the way the game works is, hunters and forces have an innate penalty when they use ranged weapons. It basically means that, from what I understand, it basically means that the further away an enemy is, the more your accuracy drops off with a hunter or a force. With Smart Link, it kind of negates that penalty, so it just takes that penalty away. So you're essentially then on level footing with rangers. So Smart Link is a really, really useful unit for that, and I would recommend that in pretty much every hunter build for later on, because you are going to be using some range weapons like charged Vulcans, or handguns with certain specials. So very, very useful unit. The fourth slot, kind of a flexible slot really. You could go with something like a Q unit, like Cure Freeze, which is just going to be useful for you. You could use something that boosts all your stats. So, I mean, you could use another V101 if you wanted to, if you were lucky. Or you could use something like a Centurion ability. You could use something like a Heavenly Luck to max your luck out. Or there's several other options you could go with. It's entirely up to your playstyle what you want to fill that fourth slot with. As for shields, so I'd probably recommend something like Kasami Bracer. So Kasami is a really, really nice shield, and it's available in episode 1 and 2 as well. So Kasami gives you okay defense, really nice evade, really decent fire, ice, and lightning resists, and also does actually boost your attack power a little bit as well. There's a hidden boost, and it actually boosts your attack power a little. I mentioned this before, but the description does say that it boosts your movement with strange powers. That's a reference to it boosting your attack power. I suppose the reference is that it's making your character able to move easier with the weapons, so they can attack easier, which means they're stronger. It's just a bit of like a lost in translation. It doesn't actually make you move faster. So this is a fantastic shield. Another option is you could also go with more defensive shield, so you could go with something like a standstill shield on Classic if you wanted to. That gives really, really nice defense, but not so much evade. In Blue Burst, there are options like Yata Mirror as well, which has a set boost with Kusanagi. That's quite nice. It works quite similar to Kasami. It gives you the attack power boost like Kasami. It also, again, has really nice evade like Kasami as well. Main difference is that the stats are a little bit lower overall, and that gives you really nice light defense instead. It also randomly gives you a boost to fly, which is actually quite useful on HUmar, but not so much on HUmar. So they're the main ones to go with. Obviously, once you get to 180 plus, you are going to want to be looking for a red ring, like every other class in the game. Red ring is just so obscenely broken that it's pretty much like guaranteed end game gear, regardless of class. That's the reason I never really mention it in the videos, just because it's something that everyone's going to go towards eventually anyway. So that's what I'd probably recommend overall. So those are the main recommended gears I would recommend. So next thing we'll look at is any recommended section IDs for HUmar. So the first ID I recommend, again, with PSO, there are two lines of thinking when you're picking your section ID. Some people like to have a section ID on their character that will find that character good items. So an example of that would be using Purple Num on a Ranger or Pinkle on a Force, because Pinkle finds good Force things. Therefore, my Force will find good Force gear. Another route you can go down is you can have an ID that will hunt things for another character. So certain character archetypes hunt better in certain areas than others. So for example, in episode 4, for example, forces are very, very strong. So if you want an item that drops in episode 4, maybe you want to look into a force for that. So there's those two lines of thought. So if you're wanting to hunt items for a HUmar specifically, one ID that you might want to look into is Scarlet. Scarlet is a fantastic ID for finding really strong hunter gear. It also finds a few ranger items as well. Scarlet, however, is absolutely terrible for finding armors and shields and units. Generally, it's pretty much weapons and nothing else. So that's one option you can go with. With that, you can find things like Chainsword, Sealed J Sword, Daylight Scar. I believe Zamba drops on Scarlet, but it's not one of the best drops for it. So there is a few options. You can also get Lame D'Argent slightly easier on Scarlet as well. So that's one option. If you're wanting to use a HUmar to hunt items, then you might want to go with potentially something like Viridia. Viridia is mainly used as like a boss ID for the most part. So one of the notable things about Viridia is that it's one of not many IDs that get the red ring from faults and parasitic gene flow from quite often you'll find that you'll get one or the other. So for example, Scarlet does get red ring but doesn't get parasitic gene flow. Viridia is fantastic because it can get both. And it's also just a very strong hunter ID as well. Although it is kind of marketed as a shot ID for rangers, it's also a very, very decent hunter ID. So Viridia is another option you can go with. As always, White is always a fantastic choice. You can't go wrong with White on basically any class. White has this construction where pretty much every single area on White will have at least one decent drop. And it's just a very, very balanced spread out ID. So are Red Rhea and Yellow Bows as well, but less so. White is just a very strong overall ID, so I'd recommend that on any character. Obviously, don't make all your characters White because then you'll never be able to find anything else, but it is a really good recommendation. So I would probably go, ideally, I would go Scarlet or Viridia or White Blue Full's not a bad choice, but I'd probably err towards Scarlet, Viridia, White overall. So next up, just some overall impressions of HUmar, so advantages and disadvantages. So advantages, you have really, really decent attack power. You know, you are the second highest attack power in the game. You are quite a way behind HUcast, but you are still a very, very strong class. And in party play, that is fantastic, particularly if you've got level 30 Force Shifter. It also, it's very, very good for dealing like concentrated damage on groups because of weapons like Yun Chang and Zanba. So it's very, very good at that. Downsides of the class is, as I've mentioned earlier, it's one of the more difficult classes to solo with, just because you don't have the advantage of Shifter and D-Band, apart from the level 3 Shifter and D-Band that the S-Red Blades give you. And that's only if you've got the S-Red Blades. Yes, you're going to have Milo and Eula every so often, but that'll only last for a couple of minutes. So typically, it is one of the harder classes to solo with because you don't have that access to regular Shifter and D-Band. Your Jillian and Zalo is not one of the strongest, and you also don't have any traps either. So you have a lot of disadvantages. You do have enough to support yourself, so you do obviously have Rester. Your Rester is enough to heal you fine. You know, your Jillian and Zalo will help. Just be aware that it probably is going to be a little bit more difficult to solo with the HUmar generally. Another slight issue with HUmar is, I mentioned this earlier on, but it's mainly to do with the techniques. So because the techniques are lower level, you can see our rest is not too bad. But you can see even with this level 15 rester, there is a little bit of a wind up before it. Rester is one of the faster techniques, admittedly, but you can see there is a little bit of a wind up. It's not a huge issue, it's just something to be aware of. The other thing is that because you don't have traps, you don't have a lot of status options, you don't have the Android booster paralysis or anything, it does mean that kind of maintaining crowd control can be a little bit more difficult with HUmar as well. Whereas all the other hunters have some other advantage. So Uniwell, yes, doesn't have the crowd control options necessarily, but Uniwell can spam techniques a lot easier than HUmar because you've got more TP, more MST, and higher level techniques. So it's easy to get away with freezing groups of enemies with Rabata with a Uniwell. You've also got that level 20 Gelin and level 20 Shifted E-Band as well to help you out. And then your casts obviously have the ability to just lock down entire spawns with traps. So HUmar is lacking all of that. So it does make it a little bit difficult to manage crowd control sometimes. So you just need to play a bit more carefully with HUmar. Again, I know the game does mark HUmar as a beginner class, but I would personally disagree with it. I don't think HUmar is. I think it is one of the slightly more difficult classes to play well. That said, if you are just playing PSO for the first time and you like the look of HUmar and you want to play it, go for it. You will be absolutely fine as long as you play it carefully and you know what your advantages and disadvantages are and you know what you can get away with. You'll be fine. It's just you just need to be aware of what your class limitations are. That's the main ups and downs for HUmar, really. So next thing we'll do is I'll just show like an example boss fight, which honestly will be pretty similar to every other hunter. Well, I'll show you that just so you can get an idea of how HUmar looks when it's played. So what we'll do now is we'll just finish the video with an example boss fight. I'm just going to fight the dragon as I normally do in these videos. So just a rough idea so you can see how HUmar plays roughly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the 13 and Disco Braveman boost. Just try and hit it with the Disco Braveman first to bring it down. Then I'll switch to Gizai because I'll assume I don't have Excalibur for this. You can see, so we didn't even use the Berserk special there. If we start using that now, you can see it's actually like getting a few targets to the boss. I've actually already got it down to the breakpoint there, so I actually don't even need to switch to Gizai. Now, yes, that has left me on really, really low health. Sometimes that will trigger your mag low HP trigger though, so it's actually quite useful to do. Now, what you would do here if I had full techniques is I'd probably just use Gizonde there just to target the dragon while it's in the air. On this sandbox character, I've only given him certain abilities just for the purposes of the video, but typically I would use Gizonde there. So we'll just avoid the burrowing. Then more or less as soon as he pops out the ground and comes back down, he should just die again. I might be able to tag him as he's coming down actually. Which makes it a lot easier when he stops to do the breath because it means you can get the hit in easier. And that's the dragon done. So again, in normal play, that would have gone a bit smoother because I would have used Gizonde when he was in the air, and that would have probably brought him down before he got to dig underground. But yeah, I hope that gives you a reasonable example of how well the Disco Braveman works. So I thought that's been a useful video overall. We will be continuing these videos until we've done all the classes in PSO, so the next one will probably be the Raker Seal, which will be next week. As usual, any questions at all, just leave them in the comments below and I'll try and answer what I can. If you like the video, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel. There are also memberships and super chats open as well as super thanks, so there's those if you're interested. We do also stream once a week on Sundays on YouTube, which is normally either PSO or another Phantasy Star game. So that's usually Sundays on YouTube, and I do post on Twitter whenever I go live. So feel free to follow me there at Section Skylight. As usual, though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.